And here we go. Um, okay. Welcome everyone to today's Toad Learning Camp. Today we're going to be talking about Travel Insurance 101. I thought it was a timely topic in light of everything going on, and so we'll dive right into that. Today I've got Kylie Swen. She is our regional sales manager from Travelex Insurance with us, and between the two of us we're going to hopefully cover everything you want to know about travel insurance. The first thing we're going to go over is, you can buy insurance through your cruise line or tour company, but you can also get an independent policy, and some credit cards also have coverage. So we're going to go over the differences of those. Purchasing travel protection through your travel advisor. When and why you should purchase travel insurance. And then we're going to compare some coverages, what to look for when you're looking at different coverages. And we're going to go over date changes and how the companies are working with the significant date changes we're having this year. And also we're going to go over pandemics a little bit. And then we'll open up for questions at the end. First of all, I did want to say this is one of the biggest comments I get when I offer travel insurance to people. We're going on the trip. We don't need insurance. But one thing that you have to remember is insurance isn't because you're just changing your mind about going somewhere. It's because it needs to cover unforeseen situations. And just like any other insurance that you have, your health insurance, you don't carry your health insurance because you know that you're sick today. You don't go out and get your insurance for that. You carry it because something could happen. Same with your homeowner's insurance. You carry it just in case something happens to your home. And that's why you want to look at travel insurance and travel protection. It's not just for canceling your trip, it's also for things that could happen while traveling and while on your trip. So the first thing that I wanted to go over was purchasing your insurance through a cruise line, tour company, airline, etc. The biggest thing to remember with these purchases is they're only going to cover you for what is included with your purchase. So if you purchase it through the cruise line, for example, and you buy your airfare through there, your pre-nights, post-nights, then it's going to cover your whole trip. But if you don't purchase your airfare through them, your pre-nights, that sort of thing, it's only going to cover your cruise. The other thing with a cruise line or tour company's insurance is many times they do not have as high a coverage limits, and they also many times do not give you the early purchase benefits like covering pre-existing conditions or other situations. The advantage to a cruise line or tour company insurance policy is that you don't have to pay for it necessarily until final payment. You can add it until final payment, and if you cancel and the cruise line doesn't have a penalty before final payment, then you're not out the money for the insurance. But that's one of the very limiting benefits that I find to purchasing it directly through a tour operator. The only other thing that I've seen with the tour operators that is a benefit is if you cancel for a non-covered reason, some of them will offer a portion of what you paid back towards a future trip with them. And I'm going to go to Kylie now for purchasing with an independent insurance company.
Sure. So one thing I want to kind of give differentiation is when you purchase insurance outside of a tour operator, you also have a benefit of financial default, which I think is going to play a role in how We look at insurance and looking at different vendors when we move through the next possibly couple of years. Financial default coverage essentially is the benefit of having insurance be able to reimburse you if that particular vendor goes out of business. Many of the third-party insurances have this benefit available when you purchase within the first few weeks of making those initial deposits. And so it's kind of the theory of all your eggs in one basket versus having that spread out and kind of deferring that risk. So that's important to keep in mind. Nobody expects anyone to go out of business, and we certainly don't want any of our, anyone in the insurance industry or in just the travel industry to go out of business. But I think there is a possibility that that could potentially happen in the future. So third party offers financial default where you won't see that with any of the vendors that you're traveling with. The other option that we give as third-party insurance is typically you're going to see a lot higher level. And this is what we do. So we have higher level benefits, especially through the post-departure benefits. So for example, is it primary insurance versus secondary insurance? I know Tracy will get into that in a little bit. But what other assistances come with having an independent insurance option? And at the same token, your agent, your advisor gets a relationship and has, as Tracy and I do, with an insurance company. So if there's ever questions, they have somebody to go to directly that kind of advocates for you as that traveler.
And then the next thing is insurance coverage by using your credit card. And this can be very misleading. Some people feel that they have coverage so they don't need to worry about getting an independent insurance policy. And you definitely want to read the fine print of what's actually covered. Sometimes it's just the primary card carrier. Sometimes it's very limited in what they're going to cover. They definitely don't cover anything post-departure with regard to medical. And honestly, some of the costs that could be involved in an accident that you have on a trip could be astronomical. So you definitely want to check the fine print on that. Kylie, do you have anything to add to that? Because I know you and I have talked about those benefits before.
Sure. Every credit card is different, and it's hard to know the limitations that you may have on your card. Oftentimes, it may only cover a portion of the trip that was secured through that specific credit card. It may only cover their card holder. So it's important to really look through that fine print and understand if you truly have coverage, if you had to cancel because of a family member that wasn't traveling. There's a lot of limitations within those cards. So that's important to understand.
Thanks. Purchasing through your travel advisor. We work with several insurance companies. We work with several tour operators and cruise lines. So we kind of know what's out there and what the options are. We are not insurance agents, however. So that's really important to understand. I know once in a while we'll get questions, is this going to be covered? Is that going to be covered? We can't answer those questions. We would refer you to the insurance company that we're looking at and have you contact them with your specific coverage questions. Because I can guarantee you, if I said Kylie's company is going to cover something and it's not something they're going to cover, they're not going to cover it. They're not going to take my word and trust that I know what's what with the insurance policy. And you shouldn't either. You should definitely contact the insurance companies with any specific questions. But like Kylie said, we do have a relationship with our insurance companies that we work with. And through all the COVID stuff that was going on, I dropped Kylie an email and she'd have everything taken care of right away for me. So those long waits that everybody else was experiencing, I didn't have to do that because of the relationship we have with the companies. And so that makes a huge difference in what we're doing. And she's also sat down with me and gone over the differences in the policies that they offer. And it helps to be able to make recommendations to you guys, which policies we should be looking at, what coverages we should be looking at. And we're able to help you, advising you what to look for. But as far as what specifically the coverages are going to be, that's going to be between you and if you have specific questions with the insurance companies directly. The important thing about purchasing insurance, there's different ways of looking at it. If you purchase it immediately after deposit, you're going to have more coverage, more coverages. You're going to have the possibility of having a pre-existing medical condition waiver. You're going to have that financial default waiver, and you're also, and we'll go over some of those again in a little bit when we get to the comparing coverages, but there's more things that are available to you if you get your insurance immediately after deposit. And most companies are going to be between 15 and 21 days depending upon the plan that they have and depending on the company. The other option is to do it before final payments or penalties start. And honestly, for me, this is when I recommend to my clients is the last date that you should get insurance. When you already have penalties started, if something happens to you and then you decide you want to get the insurance, you're out of luck. I had a client who we were 2 months away from their trip, and they had just gotten back from another vacation and said, I don't think we got insurance for our trip yet. Let's go ahead and get that. And I said, do you have anything going on? Is there anything that could exclude you from coverage? And oh, no, nothing's going on. We purchased the insurance, and then what they didn't tell me is the husband had a little rash on his leg that he was seeing a doctor for. Turns out that little rash was a life-threatening illness, and they needed to cancel their trip. There's no insurance coverage because it was pre-existing. So it's something that you want to make sure you get the coverage before you need it. Worst case though is after penalties start, you can still get insurance coverage, usually up until 1 to 2 days, depending upon the company, of the start of your trip. I always recommend that you cover all of the dates of your travel, even if you don't feel that you have, you want to cover it. For example, a lot of you guys have vacation club points and timeshares where you're not paying right now for those stays, and you're going on a cruise along with it. And I've had clients who have insured just the cruise and then gone to their vacation club rental after the cruise. And then there's a hurricane and they can't get home. There's no insurance coverage because it happened after your coverage period. So I always recommend that you do cover all the dates that you're traveling.
Tracy, if I could just quickly pipe in there. One thing when you look at a third party, as I'm obviously more familiar with that, for example, our policies, the price is the same whether you're traveling a week or 3 weeks. And so for you to have the benefit of the policy throughout that entire period of time, even if you're only insuring a particular dollar value, you still have all those other benefits for while you're traveling. So it really doesn't cost you anything different to insure 3 weeks versus 1 week, but then you have medical coverage and travel delay and all the other benefits throughout the life of that policy.
All right. And now we're going to compare some coverages for you. Kylie mentioned earlier primary versus secondary. And basically what that is if you have insurance that is covering your primary situation, it's primary, it's going to pay first. So you're not going to have to wait for a claim to be filed with another insurance company before that insurance company will pay. Now, some insurance companies do have the option of upgrading to primary coverage, but it's at an extra cost. I know Travelex primary is primary. Or the coverage
It's
is
standard on our
primary and
policies.
is standard on. Is it just on the select policy, or is it on both of your policies?
It is on both of our programs.
And so when you're comparing pricing too of insurance, that's something important to remember. Do you want to go through the hassle of going to your insurance company, your health insurance company, to have a medical bill paid when you had to go to the doctor on the ship and wait for them to deny the claim because you weren't in a coverage area and then file it with your insurance company? Or do you want to just deal with one place and not have to worry about that? Coverage limits, I think, are crucial, and I don't think people realize this as how important it is. I've done some research on medical evacuations, and medical evacuations and medical insurance coverage are the primary things I look for in insurance for myself. Many of the tour operator policies will give you between 10 and 25,000 for a medical evacuation. A typical medical evacuation, the last one that I saw was from Colombia to the United States, was around $75,000. I think I've seen on Travelex's site that the average cost is around $50,000. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so if you've got 10,000 to 25,000 of coverage and you need to be evacuated from the ship, you're going to go into debt right away, when you could have spent the same or less or a little bit more just looking around for better coverage for yourself. Same with the medical bills. I always look to make sure there's enough coverage there. And you also want to take a look at if you're delayed, how the insurance company handles that. If you miss a connection, if your luggage gets lost and you don't have luggage in your room in Amsterdam for 3 days, how do they handle that? And I think those are the issues that you run into with the tour operator policies. The limits are very, very low. The next thing to look at is what's actually covered. Like I said about the delays, we ran into a situation after a hurricane trying to get a client back home, and they were delayed 4 or 5 days getting home. They had purchased a basic insurance plan, and it gave them, I want to say it was $100 a person a day for all their delayed expenses. They couldn't even get a hotel for that. And that didn't take care of any change in fees or anything like that. So you want to look at what's actually covered. Another example is looking at a basic plan versus an upgraded plan. There's a difference in what is actually going to be considered a covered reason between the two plans. So you want to make sure that what you're concerned about is actually going to be covered, instead of just wasting your money buying a plan. The biggest example of that I can think of is with NCL. They have an offer right after you do your online check-in. If you haven't purchased insurance with them, they give you a great offer. I think it's like either $25 or $50 to get an insurance plan with them. It is the most basic plan I've ever seen. It won't cover you probably if you stub your toe on the ship, but people do it because it's a cheap policy and they think having something is better than nothing. And it's not the way to go. So definitely look at what is covered. Also look at what's excluded. Some coverages won't cover you if your employer says you can't go on the trip anymore and you have to work, so you're going to have to cancel your trip. even with Travelex, they have two different policies, and one covers you for a work-related requirement to work, while the basic plan doesn't, correct?
The basic one does only if you purchase it within the first 15 days.
Okay.
But there's definitely a different list of what is going to be covered on our select plan, which is a little higher limits versus the basic plan. So reviewing that full description of coverage about what is included and, like she says, specifically what's excluded will kind of walk you through what's important to you.
And that's kind of the last thing that I have here is look at the different plans from the same company. If you've decided which company you want to buy your insurance with, don't just automatically go with the cheapest plan or with the most expensive plan. See what's being offered and see what fits into your needs. I've had some clients that want to go with the more expensive plan when the cancel for any reason clauses were common. Because they felt that covered them for the cancel for any reason, but hadn't told me that. And some of them don't. Some of them, it's an extra rider that you have to add on. So you want to make sure that you're not just looking at the right coverage limits, but you're also, oops, this just went forward too far. You want to make sure that you're looking for the right coverages within the plans offered by that company. And Kylie, I'll let you take over here.
Sure. So we've obviously had a lot of changes in what travel plans were. From the beginning of this, we've tried to stay very fluid. So these were not necessarily the policies we had in place earlier, but given what's happened in the past 6-8 months, we've tried to be more accommodating. And really what that means is if people have not been able to travel and they want to use their policy in the future, we've given them a much more extended period of time in order to use the policy. So oftentimes we don't know when somebody might have the opportunity to be traveling. So they actually have the ability to put the policy on hold. So that's been probably the most common because people don't know when they're going to be able to travel. So when a policy goes on hold, that coverage essentially is not in effect until new travel dates are applied. So once travel is determined, they have up to 1 year from the date that the trip was originally supposed to depart. And then they have an additional 24 months to actually partake in that travel and still use that policy that they may have purchased a year ago. So it really can extend out quite a period of time. If they do extend out that far, they would just be assessed at whatever the rates are in place at the time when they confirm that travel. So they can do this by going to our website. We can do it via the phone. We have a variety of different ways for policies to be transferred. At least that's how we are handling it. So.
And that's pretty much what most of the companies are doing. The date that you can use it by varies depending on companies. One that we're dealing with, you have to use it within 2 years of the original purchase date, and other ones, I believe it's within 24 months. You have, or within a month, within a year, you have to schedule it as well. So they've all been pretty flexible in allowing you to change it once.
And I think we are obviously running into situations where we've had to change it again, especially those that were scheduled early on. So, we can accommodate as the request is. We've been pretty fluid about it. So
you'll be getting an email from me. In normal date change policies, is that pretty much how you operate all the time? That you can change it a year?
Traditionally, it's not been extended out quite that far. Usually you have a year, but we're rolling with this as it develops. So, I guess other things to keep in mind, anytime somebody purchases a policy, they always have a 15-day review period from the date that they purchase it to take a chance to review the entire policy. If it's something they find they don't want, they can ask for that refund. So just keep that in mind too, so that anybody that needs to take advantage of those early purchase windows has that ability.
Okay. And of course, the big question is what's covered and what's not, and why you should still purchase insurance. One thing that I don't have listed on here that I did want to mention, um, insurance companies are also different with how they're handling the date changes with regard to the pandemic. And this is one of the reasons that Travelex is now my go-to. Um, the, the date the insurance is effective bases all those extra coverage when they kick in. So your pre-existing waiver, the financial default, and what some of the companies that we've dealt with before are doing is, let's say you purchased your insurance on January 1st of 2020 for a July trip this year. And then your July trip got canceled, so you moved it out to next April. And then you moved it on August 1st. With Travelex, correct me if I'm wrong, when you select on August 1st, when you select that April date, that's your effective date.
Mhm.
With some of the other insurance companies, it goes back to when you originally purchased the policy. So that can be a big difference for you if you're concerned about having that coverage for financial default and having coverage for any pre-existing conditions. You're going to want to make sure that your insurance company is going to cover you.
Um, it, just a couple things, if I could, on this particular subject, because you said obviously different companies are handling it differently. Another thing to take into consideration is if they have provided a foreseeability date, particularly for pandemics. Some companies are stating there's a particular time frame in which that policy has to be in effect. So, for example, if you purchased it in January, it would cover if you had to cancel because you contracted COVID, say in July. We do not have a foreseeability date on this particular event in the world. So what that means is we're viewing COVID just as we would any other type of illness. And so if somebody were to contract it prior to departure and they're quarantined, or obviously just medically not able to travel, or of course post departure, we still have coverage in the policy where not all companies are seeing it that way. And they may say, well, your effective date wasn't until July. This was foreseeable in late January or February or whatever date they've established. So there's a big difference in if you're going to have coverage, even if you contract it while you're traveling or prior to departure at this point. So that is not something we've established as a cutoff date for this type of coverage.
And so why should we recommend, I mean, with the companies that are not covering COVID, or anything about COVID or being afraid to travel or anything like that, why should people still purchase insurance today?
Well, because weather still happens, because you still have family members that might lose their job, or you yourself might lose your job, or work might say, I'm sorry, we're going to get a big shipment now of supplies that we were waiting for, and so you're not going to be able to take that trip. Financial default can still occur. Normal life is still happening too. Kids get sick, there's accidents, so all of those things still happen. And so there's just even more reason to consider protecting your investment. And what happens when you are traveling and all of a sudden there's delays because there's not as many flights traveling. There's a lot of reasons that you should still consider insurance, because life still happens, regardless of the pandemic or not. I traveled myself last week. I had a great experience. So hopefully we'll see more of that coming. But I had my insurance because I know my life and it can change very quickly.
That's for sure. You know, like I said in the beginning, people say all the time, "Oh, I'm planning to go on this trip." And planning to go on it and then having life happen and not being able to go on it are two different things. And the last thing you want to do is be stuck with a high medical bill. And I also heard of someone who they were doing a GoFundMe page on Facebook because they were in Jamaica, went for a wedding, and someone got very, very sick, ended up in the hospital, and the hospital would not let them leave without paying the bill. And the bill was over $30,000 and they
Yeah.
didn't get insurance. So they're stuck in Jamaica until they can get the money to pay off the hospital to get out.
I've seen a number of those, and just from Mexico, everybody says, "Oh, I'm just going to Mexico." Mexico is very challenging to be released from a facility if you have an outstanding medical bill. So even though it's still in the same continent, it can be very challenging.
Definitely. All right. And now I wanted to open it up and see if anybody had any other questions. I think there was something I was going to mention in the date changes, or did I do that? I think I did. So does anybody have any questions for Kylie or me? They're all so quiet.
I know.
This isn't normal.
It's Wednesday.
All right, well, if nobody has any questions, I will.
Hey,
So,
hey, Trace, I do have
Yeah.
one question.
Okay.
If we were overseas and became ill, would the insurance cover a flight back to the US, or would the insurance make us stay in that other country for medical care? Would we have an option to say, no, I'm going back to the US?
It depends on the insurance coverage.
Okay.
If you want me to pipe in here, I can tell you
Yeah.
how we operate. So we're always going to go based on the recommendation of the attending physician to say,
Okay.
are they able to travel? Should they not travel now? Are they able to travel, get them to a facility closer to their home? So it's going to be kind of dictated, in regards to what's currently happening to you. But part of the policy has a medical evacuation. So we're going to get you back to the U.S. As far as the financial benefit. But we also work with an assistance company that helps with that whole process. So it's not only you, do you have a traveling companion we need to be concerned with? Are we communicating with your family? So it's a fairly involved process, especially if it's been an accident or something pretty significant. But we are going to take the recommendations of the doctor. If they are advising that you return home, then we're going to get you home.
Okay.
And it's nice that they're working with another company too that understands what's going on and can figure out how to get you home and what needs to happen. I had a client who was in Thailand, and the night before they were flying home, she got food poisoning, and she was visibly sick when she got to the airport, and they kicked her out of the airport and would not let her enter the airport at all. So we worked with the insurance company and got them to a doctor because she had to have medical clearance to get on a plane to go home, and went through the whole procedure. Unfortunately, she didn't have a phone access, so she was messaging me on Facebook. I was on an Amtrak and trying to get home, and yeah, it was interesting working with them. So I saw more firsthand what happens with that because I was the conduit between the client and the insurance facilitator.
Okay.
Tracy, are each one of these independent, each one of these for the insurance each trip, or can you buy a policy that covers 365 days?
There are annual policies available with some companies. I personally do not recommend them. We did have a client who purchased an annual policy, and she used it within the first month or two, and she had no more coverage for the rest of the year and needed to buy new policies each time she went on a trip. So I'm not a real fan of the annual policy. I don't think the coverage is as good. And they're costly as well. I mean, granted, they're covering you for a whole year, but you do have to put a limit on how much you're going to pay or how much the coverage is going to be.
So the policy then is for one event only, one trip only? And if you use it, then it's not good for the next trip with.
No, an annual policy would be good for the whole trip, but it's good up to the policy limits. So if your policy limits are $5,000 a person and you go on a trip that costs you $10,000 for the couple and you have to cancel it, your policy limits are used up.
Okay, so that's what happened.
But isn't that going to be on any policy that you're looking at?
But when you're doing it on an actual one trip basis, so your trip is costing you $10,000, you insure the $10,000 for that trip. And then once that trip is over and you've come home, your policy ends. And so then you'd be looking at another one. So if you claim on it, yeah, you are going to have that policy limit, but you're insuring what you're spending.
I guess I'm thinking more along the lines of a medical evacuation more than I'm worried about my $10,000. If medical evacuations are limited, I mean, are they limited in these policies?
Now, in an annual policy, if you use the cancellation benefits, you still would have the medical benefits for the remainder of the year. But again, it would be up to the policy limits on those. So if it's a lower limit on a medical evacuation, you're going to be limited to what that limit is.
I guess the one thing I would just say is that each one of those annual policies is going to vary. Some of them, they do limit you to, say, 2 medical evacuations on an annual basis, even if you really haven't exhausted the entire benefit. So on an annual basis, even for medical purposes, you really do want to understand what the limitations are, because oftentimes they do put restrictions, particularly on the evacuation benefit.
And my other concern with an annual plan is if you are worried about how much you've paid for the trip and getting your money back if you have to cancel, and let's say you do have pre-existing conditions, as soon as you've used up that policy, now all of a sudden you can't get a policy for the rest of your trips that year that cover pre-existing conditions because you're beyond the time limit. So,
And oftentimes the annual policies don't cover for pre-existing conditions.
right.
So is that any pre-existing health condition that you're talking about?
Yeah, and that was the question that I forgot to bring up that I wanted to go back to. One of the other things you want to look at with insurance companies is what their look back period is. And by that, it means when you have a situation, they're going to look back at your medical records for a certain period of time. And if you were treated for that condition in that period of time, it's considered pre-existing.
Okay.
And Travelex has one of the, if not the smallest look back period I've ever seen. Theirs is only 60 days.
Correct.
Some of them go up as high as 180 days. And pre-existing is one of those weird situations because people ask me all the time what's considered pre-existing. Now, I can't tell you if your situations are pre-existing, but the example that I use is that I've been told, let's say you have hypertension and you're taking medication for it, and your medication has been constant for years. That's not pre-existing. But if the doctor is adjusting your medication within that look back period and something happens related to that hypertension, it is considered pre-existing.
Correct.
Okay.
So Tracy, are you going to make recommendations or say what we need for Paul Gauguin? Because if you try to read their stuff to a layman, you can't make heads or tails of what they need, what they want. You know, besides it changing every day, but I mean, in general?
You mean as far as insurance or as far as
Insurance,
going?
because I think they're requiring certain types of insurance for their cruise that's going to leave in February for us, right?
I haven't seen that they're requiring insurance, but I haven't looked at it real close because it's so far off yet. I want to kind of see if things change a little bit more. But and I did send you guys a quote from Travelex for what that policy would be sufficient. And my guess is what they're requiring is that you have medical coverage when you're there. And that's it, just having a travel insurance plan is going to cover you.
Does Travelex offer yearly policies?
We do not
Or-
currently have an annual plan, no.
Okay,
There's only one company I deal with that has an annual plan. And it's not a great plan, in my opinion.
okay.
I used to, as a travel advisor, I have had opportunity to buy an annual plan for myself, and I would not go with their annual plan for myself. So now I'm starting to buy my own plans on each individual trip because the company I did use doesn't offer the same plan anymore. And most of the annual plans just aren't really enough coverage for what I want.
Okay.
Hey, Trace, I have another question. It's a what if. So if the cruise lines do go back and they do have a stipulation that you have to have a COVID test X amount of time before the cruise starts, and either you cannot get the test done or you can't get the results in time and the cruise line will not allow you on the ship, will the travel insurance cover that to recoup the cost of the cruise? Because I'm not quite sure if the cruise lines are going to refund all of your money if you can't get on the ship because you couldn't get results back.
We should know more about what the cruise lines are going to do in that situation.
Okay.
But I have a feeling that they are, what I've seen happen in the past with other situations like this, when you're denied,
Right.
when you're denied boarding, generally what happens is they give you a credit for a future trip.
Okay.
And so,
All right, 'cause-
but as far as a refund, that may or may not happen. I haven't read that whole 74-page book that the recommendations that they sent to the CDC, but I understand there's some information in there about what would happen if they had to deny boarding. Yeah.
Because I'm just interested to find out what is that time frame if they do require you to have a COVID test, because trying to get a COVID test back within 72 hours is going to be very difficult.
Well, in what they're talking about doing too is requiring a COVID test so many days before, but then also doing one on site. So, which is what Tahiti is doing, and it's proving to be, it's proving to catch any situations. So far, they only had one person, and what was amazing with that is they tested you before you got on the plane, or you had to have a test result within 72 hours of getting on the plane. And then they tested you again after you got to Tahiti. And initially it was 2 days after arrival, and now they've changed it to within 24 hours of arrival. And the person who tested positive, even her roommate did not test positive, and none of the crew members that came in contact with her tested positive. So I foresee that they're going to be looking at stuff like that, and so doing more tests when you get to the port.
Okay.
But as far as Kylie, do you have any information on that? What would happen if you were denied boarding?
Well, as it is right now, insurance policies don't have any language that speaks to the type of events that we're having, because we have to go through a filing process with 50 different jurisdictions. So We haven't quite tackled that yet. I don't know if we will be able to do that anytime in a near, the near future, just because filing with all the different states and rewriting products is a major project. I can tell you from a personal experience that I traveled last week to a state that requires a test within 72 hours. And you have to use a declaration or, complete a declaration, upload your test. I had my test back in about, I want to say it was about 54 hours from when I took it. And I was a tier 4, which means I'm not a priority. I had just been advised that, I need to take the test, and it was a very smooth process. And it worked quite well. So I
How
felt
much did it cost you?
I actually just went to the local clinic. My insurance covered it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, my insurance would not cover it for travel, is what I've been told.
That's what I've been told. I haven't seen the paperwork on it yet, but we're going to go with that right now. So,
So it could be like $250 twice, right?
I mean, at this point in time, my insurance said they were going to be covering it. So I've also
Yeah.
met my deductible this year. So.
But if you're on a cruise ship and they're requiring it 1 day in, 4 days in, and then they're requiring it to come back into the country, all those are basically your bill.
Likely, but with Tahiti, when you're doing it 24 hours prior or after arrival, they're going to charge you $59 is what they said.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
And they're just doing it once now, or they're not doing it the 4 days in?
No, they've changed it to just 24
Okay.
hours after arrival.
So is that going to be after arrival if you're doing pre-nights, or is that after arrival on the ship?
After arrival, even doing pre-nights. So the people who arrive on the ship with the airlines that the cruise line's providing, they're not getting there until the day we embark. They will have to basically quarantine in their room until the test result comes back. And it sounds like they're doing pretty quick turnaround, like just a few hours. So it may not be an issue for them because we get in so late at night. But yeah, we'll be able to go in when we land that morning. We'll be able to go and get our test done.
And when we get off the ship, we may have to do it also to go to Hawaii from.
Yes, we will.
The other thing too, things might change between now and February.
I think things could change between now and next week.
I agree they could change, but it's the fact that you're hooked into the pricing of this way ahead of February. It's not like you can wait till February to pay, right?
Right.
So you have that issue of all this out the door while you're waiting for them to figure out what they want to do to you.
Well, and many of them are offering options to defer your trip to another date if it's not going to work after the final payment. They've been really good working with us on that sort of thing. And like for the Tahiti trip, the penalties don't set in. We'll have minimal penalties at the end of October, but then the real penalties start setting in at the end of November when the final payment starts being due.
Okay. And we don't know what kind of tests that they're going to accept. I mean, because that seems to be, tests seem to be all over the board, right?
There's a 6-page document on their website with all the tests that they will accept.
Yeah, but you can't make, unless you're a medical professional, you'd have no idea.
But your doctor would be able to tell you what kind of tests they're giving you. So I can tell you right now, they're not accepting the self nasal swab that you do and send in. Those aren't acceptable right now. But again, that could change.
Okay. So I guess you just print the list.
Pretty much, yeah.
I've got appointments scheduled for both Louise and I to go in to our primary care, and for him to, in early January, for him to then issue out schedule us for an actual test the Monday before we leave. And I'm going to be given a list of the approved tests to ensure that that's what we get, and we'll find out. The worst case is I show up in LA the evening before we depart, and I'm running around in North Hollywood on that day.
Well, there's a list of places in the LA area that will do an instant test for you specifically for the airlines.
Okay.
And who knows, United right now is going to be doing testing for visitors going to Hawaii. Could be the same with other airlines as we get closer. So, like I said, things are changing all the time, and we could see something totally different tomorrow. So, does anybody have any other questions for Kylie?
I think I'm good. Thank you very much, Kylie.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, Tracy. Appreciate it. And
Thank you.
happy travels, everyone. I hope everything goes smoothly.
And
Thank
hopefully soon we'll all be traveling again. And
Uh,
thank you.